In the last session, we discussed how the integration attributes works, how does the transaction log works, how does the integration map works, what are the field attributes, how do we configure them. And then comes the part of document transformation. So it is somewhat similar to what we discussed in EIB, that there are three parts to it. One is get data, one is transformation, and the third is deliver. So it is somewhat similar to your EIB, but then this is done through a business process. So in your integration, you set up services, attributes, maps, and transaction logs. Then Workday defines the rules and the output. Workday builds the integration using the SOAP API. Then document transformation integration system transforms the output of the Workday connector in the transform format that is needed by the receiving party. And then the delivery services delivers transform to output to the endpoint. Now, document transformation, when the receiving system of your R1 integration requires a file format other than Workday XML, document transformation can be added to the design pattern to transform the output into the format required. Similarly, when we are doing an outbound EIB, we have the capability to do a transformation, make changes to the integration, the values, the format type. Similarly, you can also do it in integrations as well. But whenever you're doing a document transformation, you have to keep a couple of things in mind. Uh, it is reasonable if restricted to 3 or less transformation within an integration. So your integration may run for hours and hours. It may run for a few minutes and get it completed, depending on the complexity of the data, the kind of integration you're running, and what kind of transformation you are performing on it. So thumb rule is if your integration is running in less than 2 hours or less, or completing in 2 hours or less, for the entire system processing, like getting the data, doing the transformation, then delivering the data, then it is advisable. But if your integration is going over 2 hours, then you have a very, very complex integration, and it is not recommended that your integration should run for this long. And do ensure that your document transformation was specifically designed to work with your particular connector. So integrations using document transformation are built in the tenant. Using the integration business process, you can retrieve and deliver the documents. Additionally, you can string multiple integration systems together as well. So this is a way to eliminate the limitation of EIB to have only one data source, one transmission, one delivery point without having to use the studio. So if you remember, when we set up the inbound or the outbound EIB, we select either the custom report or the web services to process the data. But in an integration, you can have more than one data source. You can have more than one transformation, and you can have more than one delivery point without having to use a studio. So what is Workday Studio? I will cover that a little bit later on, but that is a desktop software or a Windows client with which you can design, customize your integrations in a GUI format and a text format. So it is a specific tool provided by Workday for advanced integration systems administrators. So in order to do like more than one data source, more than one transformation, more than one delivery, and even to use the studio, you must be familiar with the XML technologies like XSLT, XPath, etc. So one must have knowledge and experience with XML in order to be able to do advanced integrations. So if you're processing large sets of data using multiple web service calls, you need complex logging and error processing. You may still want to consider using the studio. So as you grow into the integrations area, that Workday Studio would be one thing that you may want to get yourself involved in, get yourself some experience with. Of course, Workday Studio is available from the community. You can download it from there, install it, and run it. So in an integration system template that enables you to attach an integration service attachment or XSLT style sheet to the integration. Using document transformation template, you can attach an XSL file that contains Workday specific transformation attributes that define the transformation and the format of the integration file. So what this particularly means is that when you get the data from Workday, say in XML format, so that is the complete data set that you have received without any processing, without any uh, transformation of the data. But then you design an XSL file. And what that XSL file is, it will define the parameters that what data it is getting from Workday, what transformation or changes that are going to be done to that data, and how the data will be delivered to the endpoint. That is what your XSL or XSLT transformation template will define. See, for example, you're getting your employee length of service in years, months, and date. Like you get it in a uh, format where it is 2 years, 14 months, and 7 days that the employee has been with the company. Now you need to transform this data into number of days. So that'll be about 740 some odd days. So if that is the format you need for your XSLT or XSL transformation template to transpose the data into, where your endpoint is expecting to receive in such a format, this calculation would need to be defined by XSL template. You can have multiple changes in your XSLT format as well. For example, your legal name is coming as last name, comma, first name from the system. But then your endpoint is expecting to receive your first name second in this second in the sequence of data. So first name, comma, last name is expected by the system. So you need to switch the order using your XSLT when you're doing the document transformation. For example, another thing that you would need to do is maybe your system has your for terminated employees, it has a start date and then it has the end date. And your receiving system would need to have the number of years the employee has been in service, and maybe that is not available in Workday. So using your start date and using your end date, you can calculate the number of days between those two dates, and in whichever format, like number of days, say number of years, months, days, or maybe in a decimal format, like 7.63 years or 7.63 as the duration of the service. So any kind of those specific custom requirements that would require the data to be altered in a way that is acceptable by the endpoint can be done with the XSLT file. And that will be a standardized or standardized for that integration where it will acquire the data from Workday, apply the XSLT template, process through it, and then generate the output file. And then that output file will be delivered to the endpoint. So these Workday specific attributes are referred as element transformation, validation, or ETV, and XML to text, or XCT. They add Workday specific processing instructions when XSL file and elements using attributes. So document transformation specific processing instructions give you some control over the behavior of the integration. For example, if a required field is missing, you determine that whether there is a warning, error, or a critical severity at level. You have more control. So basically, you can set it up that if a required field, such as maybe the date of birth or the gender or the employee management level type, if that field is missing within your data set, you can determine either it's a warning as an output of the integration. So a warning would be just a warning and it will continue with the integration. An error could be that it'll report an error, but it'll continue with the integration. Or a critical severity level would be it will terminate the integration, that it is a critical information that is needed. And without this EIB cannot continue to process. So it will error out, no, it will give you severe critical severity level error, and it will terminate the integration process. So you have more control over the validation messages, validation and messaging than you would with an EIB. So if you remember, we ran the EIB in validation mode before we load the data into the system. So with, of course, document transformation, you have more control over the validation messages that you're getting and more control over the validation mode and the messages that you receive and how do you translate them or use them to amend your EIB, amend your integration to your document transformation, and how do you process it. Additionally, the XTT attribute, which is XML to text, enables you to define the format of the non-XML file output as well. So what does this all mean? So let's take an example. Let's go back to our tenant. So integration system. So let's open the worker effective changes interface. So here we see the number of integration services that are configured in this integration system or this connector. So worker effective changes interface is yes, it is enabled. Then launch parameters is enabled. Integration system DIS is enabled. Effective stack all workers is enabled. Then performance log is enabled. So we are getting an error here on this tenant that your tenant is not able to run data analyzation so that it uses effective change. So we can edit the integration. All right, so jumping on to integration attributes, we can see all the integration attributes that we have, like the output tag, additional output tag. So here, worker effective change summary DIS is required for launch, and organization code is needed for that. So that's the only thing that's set up in attributes, but in integration maps, here you can see that maps a worker address for value usage tags. So billing is our internal value for billing is BILLING, but the vendor expects the value to be BILL. So same for mailing, remit to shipping, tax reporting, WFM or work from home. Similarly, for gender, as you can see, male, female, and not declared are expected by the vendor as F, M, and N, and rest of the values will go as default. Now we discussed that it requires a business process. And here for this specific integration, we have a business process defined to run this integration. And in this business process, here we can see that it's initiation, then services fire integration, and the third step is configure document transformation. So when we click on this, here we can see the name of the transformation. So here in the document delivery section, we have defined the SFTP parts like existing transport, then all the SFTP details like SFTP localhost, directories incoming demo. Then you have your advanced settings. Then you have your authentication method, then authentication details, then any environment restrictions. And here you can add more than one delivery methods within the integration. Then also you can select the type of documents, like from this particular integration process, or do you want to have it as a full load, like from all previous integration steps, or from specific integration steps that you would like. So depending on the requirement, you would have a lot of flexibility on your document delivery configuration as well. Also, if I look at the configure PeopleSoft uh, integration steps, so it is just a name, PeopleSoft person basic. So if I look at the details of the document transformation, then I can see what are my attributes that I'm going to be sending through my integration, like PeopleSoft person basic sync options, the output encoding. Uh, do we need to audit validation messages? Document retention policy required for 180 days. And then it's a document transformation is yes, and it is enabled in the tenant in the integration. And here then we can see the security parameters for the integration as well. So it's using the payroll interface and the template cloud. And the Workday account that is being used to run this integration is the integration system, PeopleSoft Doc Transform. So security for running this integration would be similar to what you would require to run any task. So the user must be part of integration administrators or integration user system, your domain security policy. You would need a Workday account created to run that integration. And then, of course, the transformation, the delivery, and the uh, sourcing data from Workday via web services or an advanced report would also require permissions to run this integration. Right. Let's have a look at another one. So this is a business process configuration for SAP. And let's get the documentation delivery. So again, it's SFTP. Then, of course, SFTP address, the block size, authentication. Also, similar to business processes, we can also have step conditions as well. That, if you would like that there should be a condition before this integration can be fired, we can also put it here in the business process, but that would generally not be needed for your integration because you're controlling your integrations from within your data source, your document transformation, and your delivery method. So in here, it's pulling up the worker ESP service as initial service revoke to invoke. Then the DIS is optional, though all these features are enabled, but it's just only in using the Workday worker data initialization service. And if we look at the integration attribute maps, we can see all the values defined here for this particular integration. So to control the version of the output format, it is required for launch, and this probably is decided between your partner and yourself as well as to what version name you would like to set it up. So your output format is going to be XML. Name type that you would like to send is legal preferred name. Then, of course, the ISO code, the address type, phone type. Do we need to send private address? It says no. Then include private phone numbers. It says no. Email type, we should send the work email. Then the types of organization that are included in the integration are company, cost center, region, and supervisory. Then include multiple positions. Says job type is additional job, international assignment, primary job. So 3 types of job types are included in this integration. Then the document retention policy is 180 days. Similarly, if you look at the integration maps, so if there are any exceptions that are mentioned here, otherwise the standard mapping is being used in this integration. So the business process attached to this, so we already had a look at this. So that is a related business process, and of course in the security assignment as well. And if you need to launch this, similarly, integration system, integration, launch, run now. Because this is not currently configured, like the host was local host, so it's not going to send the data anywhere. So when you do launch the EIB, then you have your launch parameters for your code connector. Now you have as of entry movement, effective date, last successful as of entry movement, and last successful effective date. And then whether you want to send a full file or just the change file, if you want to restrict it by organization or restrict it for any specific workers, you have these values available. And what do these values do when we're launching the integration? Let's go back to our PowerPoint. So document transformation that include custom integration maps and attributes. We've seen that also one or more than 3 transformation required. Post-connector output use Workday Studio. All right. So what it is recommending that when you have more than three transformations that you would need to do on a particular given integration, it is recommended to use Workday Studio. So the worker core connector, we have seen two examples of those. So let's discuss it more in detail. So the core connector worker integration system exports worker data changes from Workday in simple XML format. Workday also supports output in CSV format with certain limitations. As you hire, promote, transfer, terminate, or update worker data, the integration generates a text file containing the changes. So remember I was saying whether you want to send the full file or the changes file. So depending on the need of your requirements, that maybe you're only required to send the changes to the existing worker, where for existing worker, it could be promote, transfer, terminate, or update worker data. If it's a new hire, then it's a complete data set for that particular worker. But then do you want to send all workers, either active or terminated? Then you can use the full file. So using configurable data sections or Workday delivered report fields and calculate fields that you can create, you can export any worker data in any combination. So in the core connector, there's a change detection process. So Workday detect changes to the worker data via monitoring and transaction log. So when you set up the integration system, you must select which business process and transaction types that the integration system should subscribe to. And if your integration system does not subscribe to a transaction type that affects your worker's profile, Workday will not include those changes triggered by that transaction type. For example, if you're just changing the custom organization for a particular worker, which is not a job change, so you can exclude organization assignment business processes from your integration. That okay, don't include that data in that integration. So worker integration uses a three-step process to detect and report changes. So when the core connector worker integration checks the transaction log, the integration determines which worker have had changes which resulted in the generation of at least one of the configured transaction events. The second step would be for each worker with a matching transactional change, the integration compares the report fields for the time at which the integration was run and the time at which it was run last successfully. It identifies which, if any, of the values of interest have been modified. So if the worker has any changes in field values or eligibility criteria, Workday generates an appropriate creation, change, or deletion message. So now if you recall, if I go back to my integration, so when I'm using the as of entry movement and the effective date, or in the last successful as of entry movement and last successful effective date, I'm doing a comparison. Say if I'm scheduling this for on a monthly basis, so my last successful entry movement would be say 08 and last effective. And say I'm going to use the current date as of effective as of moment and effective date. Generally, I should be running this at the end of the month or whatever the schedule is required. But for now, I can set up these values. And if I need to only send the incremental changes that has happened on the worker, then I would not select the full file. The full extract or differential extract. So you can configure a core connector worker integration to select all workers who meet the eligibility criteria that determine the changes for the return data. To enable this option, disable the transaction log service, and when you run the integration, Workday extracts all applicable data for the defined population of the employees. So if any data for an employee changed during the defined date range, Workday includes all data for that employee. So in some cases, this might be a requirement that you don't use the transaction log service where you're comparing the changes and only sending the changes. And maybe the partner or the vendor would require the complete file for each run as a full extract. So it all depends on the vendor's requirement and your configuration as to what type of data do you need to send, either a full data set or a differential extract set. So we talked a little bit about eligibility. So for each integration system, you can define a group of workers that belongs to the integration system. Membership is defined by a single Boolean report field or a calculated field. So in your advanced reports, where you are extracting the data or the web services that you're pulling the data, you can also you may also set up the worker eligibility criteria as well. It could be, say, the eligibility criteria could be as simple as management level, could be as simple as hire date, could be as simple as worker type, like contingent worker or a full-time employee, or it could be a location-based and a combination of these values. So your eligibility criteria can be set up in your data extract. So if the field value is true for a worker, then the worker is a member of that group. The changes for that worker are included in the integration. Another example could be that you're running the worker connector for United States, but you have operations ongoing in multiple countries. So you may require to have multiple integrations for each countries, and your eligibility criteria for that could be location or a pay group type or a compensation package type. That maybe you have a different compensation for United States, maybe different for Canada. So if the field value is false, the integration ignores that particular worker from your data extract or from your population. So integration field overrides. So the field overrides are flexible tool to customize your integration systems. We use this field to overrides to map tenanted data to an external system and add custom values to the integration output files. So let's have a look at that. So I can go to my integration field overrides. And then for every section, if I need to make changes to a particular field, Workday does give us the capability to do that. Say for legal name, if we need to add an override value, Say I want the first name local to be used as a legal name. So now if I look at my global parameters, I have defined the parameters in the extended field as to how I would like the system to behave when it gets the data. These are the field overrides that I would like to configure in my tenant, in my integration. So field override uses report fields or calculated fields to supply the values that are required by the external system, and to configure the integration field overrides as related actions on the integration system. Select integration system, configure field overrides that we just did. So the core connector, Workday integration template includes define eligibility and eligibility criterion field override. Designate a report or a calculated fields that identifies if a worker is not eligible for the integration. The report field or calculated field must be based on the worker business object, and it must run a Boolean true or false. So Boolean true includes the worker in the integration. A Boolean false exclude the worker in the integration. Like for example, when I just gave an example of like pay group, location, management level, or any kind of eligibility criteria that you may want to set up as a true false condition, whether it's say is manager equals to true. So if it's a yes or no condition or a true false condition, then only the true values that are coming into that report or that data source would then allow them to be part of the eligibility criteria for this integration. Well, we've already gone through the majority of these activities. Like we have viewed an integration system, we have viewed the integration services, we viewed an integration attributes, the field overrides, and also the maps. So any questions so far? I know this is quite dry, as I mentioned in our last session as well. Integration is not for everyone. And maybe something that you may not use uh, initially into your Workday career, but it is something that would come in handy when you have experience in Workday for say a couple of years, and then you have also taught yourself XML and XSLT and the SOAP interface or the SOAP language, and that is something that these will come handy. So next part is how do you launch an integration? So launch an integration, it's somewhat similar to launching the EIB, but as we saw a little bit earlier. So to launch an integration, run the launch schedule integration task. This task can be run directly or it can be accessed by integration systems related action item and selecting integration and launch schedule.